Hi, my name is Shazia Khan, and today's unit that we'll be looking at is contract law, which is 3.28. We'll be looking at the assignment discussion area in regards to the contract law, and also just a little bit on the module spec so that we have an idea of what we'll be doing in the assignment. So the unit is 15 credits. It's a pass, merit or distinction. And the assignment is in accordance with the organisation's guidance. So the first learning outcome that we did look at was to know the key principles of contract law. We looked at the key principles of contract law, the classifications of contract, and the theories behind contract law. So to gain a pass mark, we need to look at outlining the principles of contract law. 1.2 to describe the different classifications of contracts. To gain a distinction, the additional extension activities is to look a little bit further and look at D1, which is to analyse the three key principles of contract law. Number 2, the learning outcome was to understand the key elements of a binding contract. So that was things like offer, acceptance, the postal rule, invitation to treat, consideration, acceptance with reference to case authorities. So to gain a pass mark for this 2.1 is to distinguish between an offer and an invitation to treat. 2.2 to explain the issues regarding the postal rule. 2.3 to explain consideration, the rules of consideration, and the test of enforceability. To gain the merit additional extension activities, to gain the merit is an M1 to explain the methods of acceptance and when they will be effective. To gain for learning outcome 2, a distinction mark, you will need to look at D1, which is to analyse the issues of organisations must take into account when using instantaneous methods of communication in respect of contracts. Then we looked at learning outcome 3, which is to understand contractual terms and exclusion clauses. To gain the pass mark, you need to look at 3.1, which was to analyse the difference between a condition and a warranty using cases to exemplify the analysis. 3.2, explain how terms are implied with contracts. 3.3 to explain the importance of methods of incorporation, and 3.4, which is to assess the importance of construction for interpretation of the contract. To do the extension activity for distinction is 3D1, distinguish between a term and a representation. To look at learning outcome 4, we need to look at understanding the legal issues of misrepresentation and mistake. To gain a pass mark, you need to look at 4.1, distinguish a term of a contract from a misrepresentation, and then 4.2 to differentiate between the different types of misrepresentation. To gain the merit extension activity, we need to explain what is meant by an actionable misrepresentation. Actionable misrepresentation, and 4.3 to explain the categories of common mistake, mutual mistake, unilateral mistake, and their impacts on contract. To gain a distinction method, we need to analyse the remedies for misrepresentation. We also need to explain the impact of mistake, common, mutual, and unilateral on a contract. For learning outcome 5, we need to understand the legal issue of frustration. And to gain the pass mark, we need to look at 5.1 is to summarise the different ways in which a contract can be frustrated, providing examples of each. And to gain, for learning outcome 6, we need to understand the legal issues of duress and undue influence. To gain a pass mark for that, we need to explain the concept of duress and undue influence. And for the extension activities D1, we need to analyse the impact of duress and undue influence and can have on a contract, and using examples to exemplify it. For learning outcome 7, we need to understand the legal issues of damages. We need to look at 7.2, which is the pass mark, to explain the concept of remoteness and measurement of damages. And we need to, for the extension activity, look at D1, explain the impact of remoteness and measurement of damages using examples to exemplify the explanation. So using case law. Indicative content. So for learning outcome 1, contract law, we looked at the requirements of a contract, be able to apply the principles and use cases to exemplify this, moral, social, political and commercial factors which affect principles of a contract law. We need to look at the classifications of contracts, so the equity theory, will theory, formalist theory. Number 2, binding contract. We need to look at the key elements of a binding contract, how they operate in a commercial context, including the elements of an offer and acceptance, the postal rule, consideration and enforceability. We need to also look at the methods of acceptance and how e-contracts operate in a commercial context. Number 3, we looked at contractual terms and exclusion clauses. Contractual terms and exclusion clauses include things like a warranty, condition, inanimate term and how these terms are applied, methods of incorporation, construction, a term and representation with reference to case law and examples. Number 4, misrepresentation, mistake and frustration. So contracts which are impossible to perform at the time the contract is made, common mistake, and after the contract is made, doctrine of frustration, misrepresentation, representation and terms, the definition of the types of misrepresentations, so negligent, fraudulent misrepresentation, and the remedies for misrepresentation and the damages. We also had to look at duress and undue influence, and economic duress with reference to case examples. We then looked at damages as a result for the breach of a contract, so what damages are awarded, specific performance and injunctions. We looked at the issue of damages such as remoteness, mitigation, causation with reference to case law. So now I'm going to stop sharing this module specification and we'll go on to the assignment area for contract law. Now we're looking at the assignment area for the unit contract law, ATHE level 3 diploma in law, 15 credits. So this is the assignment area and we're going to go through it with what you need to do and the extension activities as well. So for the first part of it, you have just finished your course and have been working in a small family-run business for 6 months on a temporary basis. You love your work, but you can see that the family has no idea about their legal obligations. They do not appear to understand contract law and you decide to produce some information for them. You intend to collate your information as a formal report and give it to key members of staff so that they will impress your managers and hopefully lead to a permanent job for you. Section 1. You need to look at the principles of contract law, the key elements of a binding contract. So you must start with the basics. In the first part of the report, you should inform them about contract law. You need to outline the key principles, the requirements of a contract, and the moral, social, political, and commercial factors that affect contract law. And to do this, you need to be also using case examples to exemplify your work to improve your marks. You need to look at describing the different classifications of a contract. You need to make sure that the key people understand the key elements of a binding contract by distinguishing the difference between an offer and invitation to treat with reference to case law. You need to explain the issues regarding the postal rule. You need to explain consideration and the rules of consideration and the test of enforceability. When doing your assignment, you need to make sure it's clear which part you are doing, and also you need to be using Harvard referencing throughout doing your assignment. So please put the headings in, put your name, your ID number, the module, and the credits as well, and then each one under a heading so it's clear for the reader. And also clarify the difference when you are doing extension activities. So the extension activities is to gain a merit. You must also explain the methods of acceptance and when they will be effective. You must provide examples to illustrate your answer. To gain a distinction grade, you must also analyze the key theories of contract law, analyze the issues of organizations must take into account when using instantaneous methods of communication in respect of contracts. And that would be learning outcome 1, AC1, 1.1, 1.2, learning outcome 2, AC 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3. Make sure that you have got headings for each area that you are completing, and also headings for the extension activities, so that the person marking it understands where that you have completed the extension activities. Section 2. So you need to look at the contractual terms and exclusion clauses. There are some staff in the company who need more detailed information on contractual terms and exclusion clauses. So to help them, your report must also include a section in which you look at analysing the difference between a condition and a warranty using cases and exemplify the analysis. You need to also explain how terms are implied within contracts. You need to explain the importance of methods of incorporation. You also need to look at assessing the importance of construction for interpretation of the contract. To gain a merit grade, you must also distinguish between a term and a representation. And again, I will say make it clear where you identify your extension activities. So you need to look at learning outcome AC 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, and 3.4. Then section 3. Further legal issues. So to bring this organisation completely up to speed, you really want them to understand the legal issues of misrepresentation and mistake. Frustration, duress, and undue influence and damages. So you add a further section to the report in which you will distinguish a term of a contract from a misrepresentation. You will differentiate between the different types of misrepresentation, and you will explain the categories of mistake, common, mutual, and unilateral, and their impacts on contract. You will then summarise the different ways in which a contract can be frustrated, providing examples of each, and you will explain the concept of duress and undue influence. You will also need to look at the concept of remoteness and measurement of damages. To do the extension activities for section 3, you need to look at, to gain a merit, you must also explain what is meant by actionable misrepresentation. You need to look at explaining the impact of mistake, common, mutual, and unilateral on a contract. And to gain a distinction grade, you must also look at analysing the remedies for misrepresentation. You must analyse the impact of duress and undue influence can have on a contract, using examples, case examples that we went through to exemplify the analysis. You must also explain the impact of remoteness and measurement of damages using examples to exemplify the explanation. And that's looking at learning outcome AC 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, learning outcome 5.1, and learning outcome 6.1, and learning outcome AC 7.1. So these are some of the guidelines for the assessors. So the assessments submitted by the learners must achieve the learning outcomes and meet standards specified by the assessment criteria for the unit. So to achieve the merit or distinction grade, the learner must demonstrate they have achieved all the criteria set for these grades. Where work for the past standard is marginal, assessors can take into account any extension work completed by the learners. The suggested evidence below is how learners can demonstrate that they have met the standards. So these are some of the things you could have looked at in regards to assessing the standards. So task 1, learning outcome AC 1.1, 1.2, learning outcome AC 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3. The report must be appropriately structured. In section 1, the learner must demonstrate a full understanding of the principles of contract law and uses cases to exemplify their knowledge. This will include an outline of the key principle of contract law, a comprehensive description of the different types of contracts. The work will be supported by the learner, clearly distinguishing the difference between an offer and an invitation to treat. The learner must provide relevant information to explain the issues of postal rule, and there must be a full explanation of consideration, the rules of consideration, and the test of enforceability. Suggested additional evidence for the merit is the learner provides a detailed explanation of the methods of acceptance and when they will be effective. Suggested additional evidence for a distinction mark, the learner should provide reasoned analysis of key theories of contract, equity theory, will theory, and formalist theory. The analysis of issues organisations must take into account must be broken down in different parts, and each part should be examined in detail. The learner must include examples such as employment and retail practice and show why they are important. In regards to learning output, task 2, learning outcome 3, AC 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, and 3.4. In this section, the learner's analysis the difference between a condition and a warranty, using cases to exemplify the analysis. The analysis should identify the key points and show how they're related to actual practice. Using examples from current contracts, learners must also explain how terms are implied within contracts, and they should show the possible impacts. The explanation of the importance and methods of incorporation should be comprehensive, and the points must be illustrated with examples or case histories. Learners assess the importance of construction for interpretation of the contract and make a reasoned judgment. For the suggested additional evidence for merit, case law is used to clearly distinguish differences between a term and representation. So for task 3, it's learning outcome AC 4.1, AC 4.2, AC 4.3, LO5 AC 5.1, LO6 AC 6.1, LO7 AC 7.1. The learner must demonstrate their knowledge and understanding of further legal issues. The learner must use case law to distinguish a term of a contract from a misrepresentation, differing between the types of misrepresentation, the explanation of the categories of mistake, and the impacts on contract must be detailed and demonstrate the learner's understanding of legal issues. The learner must use examples to summarize the different ways which a contract can be frustrated, and the summary must give the main facts concisely. The explanation of the concepts of duress and undue influence and the remoteness of measurement of damages must be provided clearly in the full. In the merit, to gain the merit mark, the learner must clearly explain what is meant by an actionable misrepresentation and the impact of mistake, common, mutual, and unilateral on contract. The work must demonstrate that the learner has a sound understanding of these legal issues. To gain the distinction and the extension for the distinction mark is the analysis provided by the learner for the remedies for misrepresentation and the impact duress and undue influence can have on the contract must be examined in detail, and the learner needs to use examples to illustrate the points in which they are made. The explanation of the impact of remoteness and the measurement of damages should be clearly provided and illustrated with examples. So make sure that when you are doing these tasks in each section that you are able to identify the extension activities with reference to illustrating your answers with case examples. And we've looked through case examples, but also on the slides, there are case examples there that you could look at. So this assignment on contract law, please make sure that you have the headings in, you have your name, you have your, I call it the ID number, you have the award that you're doing, so it's ATHE level 3 diploma in law, and also that you have what section you're doing and your extension activities as well need to be clearly identified, and you should be using Harvard referencing system to help you with anything. If you have any questions regarding your assignment, you can email learnerwork@UK Varsity to help you in regards to completing the assignment, or if you've got any questions around that. Additional resources in completing the assignment, the PowerPoint slides and additional reading is all on Moodle for you to look at. Please make sure you use Harvard referencing to reference all your work, and thank you for attending today's session.